Hello guys, welcome to Redditor's Revenge. Here we post amazing revenge stories daily. And if you want more content like this, please subscribe to the channel and stay tuned with us. Moving on to today's first story. I used to work in hospitality in a metro known for its obscenely huge tourist population. You know, the city built around the mouse. I was a manager for the recreational division of the hotel. So one day, my boss comes into the shared manager's office and starts rummaging around for something, and strikes up a small conversation about work-related minutiae with me. It's important to note she is 2 tiers above me but was acting as head of the department while searching to replace my previous boss who recently quit. Great guy, by the way, huge loss to the company. As we're talking, she abruptly stops and says, "By the way, you need to shave your beard. You look like a terrorist and I don't employ terrorists." Haha, a funny joke between colleagues, right? Nope. I am half Indian and I do look Middle Eastern and have been taking this kind of shit since middle school. Plus, we're not close at all. So I reply as calmly as I can muster, "Hey, I get you're trying to be funny, but on my end, it comes off as pretty ignorant, so I'd appreciate it if you chilled out with the terrorist stuff," to which Mary retorts, "Oh, I'm ignorant. We'll see how ignorant I am during your annual review," and proceeds to walk out of the room in a huff. My jaw dropped so low I could taste the floor. You would think it was an easy fix, right? Go to HR and all. She's made rude comments like this before. I've refrained from contacting HR because I didn't want to be petty, but now she threatened my pay, and that's no bueno. So I go to HR like a good boy and tell the HR director, who will call Boyd. I explicitly ask him not to mention it to anyone, just to log it away in case someone else reports something similar, and he can establish a pattern of behavior. Well, Boyd decided that he simply must talk to Mary about it. I stress again that I am not comfortable with it since she strikes me as the vindictive type, not good. He promises there will be no retaliation and tells me he'll contact me later for a statement, which I thought was weird. Why not make a statement now? And that was that. About a week goes by and I follow up with Boyd because I've been getting some less than pleasant vibes from Mary. Nothing substantial, but odd. When I ask what happened, he tells me, well, it appears that Mary was just joking, but she has agreed to never say anything like that again. Your annual review is not in jeopardy. Okay, at that point, I decided to just let it go. Fast forward a month, a new director for our department is hired and surprise, it's her roommate and former front desk supervisor, Joe. Okay, cool. I'm used to nepotism because the entire hotel operates that way, whatever. Never had an issue with him. Didn't know him too well, but I'm happy our little hive has a leader again. Man, how ducking naive I was. From the get-go he is unpleasant. Snide comments left and right, changing my schedule at the last minute every week or scheduling me on my established days off, giving away opportunities to my peers that I'm never considered for, making me take improvement classes none of my peers have to take. All strange, but up to that point nothing earth-shattering. Until one day I get written up out of the blue for refusing to inform a superior of leaving the premises, referring to me leaving the day prior without literally saying the words, "Hey Joe, I'm leaving for the day." This is not an established policy, written or otherwise. When I say I'm leaving, it's a courtesy. Second, I know for a fact my peers don't always say when they leave. Personal observation, and was corroborated by them after asking around. Third, knowing that my peers aren't held to the same bogus standard and having never been written up for it, I know this is a direct shot at me. My review is ducked. Best part, Joe let it slip that Mary asked for me after I left, and when it was found that I was indeed gone, she requested the write-up. That was duck up number 2. Lady number 3 came when Boyd decided to cover his ass when I approached him with all the evidence pointing to retaliation and discrimination in the workplace. I learned he never properly documented his discussion with me or Mary, and that he's been playing the whole ducking thing by ear. I decided to write my long past due statement then and there, turn it in, and email a picture copy to the corporate office. I tell Boyd that I am sorely disappointed about how he handled the issue, and he responds by accusing me of dramatizing the whole ordeal. He was very flippant about the whole thing, rolling his eyes and everything. Okay buddy, I see you now. So finally, we've reached the revenge. After some time, I scrounge up all the evidence I can. My write-up, my co-workers' write-up records with their permission, company policy manuals. My schedules for the past month including the bogus classes only I was made to attend, my co-workers' schedules, witness statements from peers when Mary has said other demeaning things, and a few other items. Next step, I tell off Joe, because duck him, I make sure he is very angry when I leave. You'll see why later. After crossing my T's and dotting my I's, I resigned with a 2-week notice. That night, I type up a letter to the EEOC and attach all my evidence. I mention Mary, Boyd, and Joe by first and last name. I hint that I am pondering a lawsuit. A few weeks later, I have my girlfriend call my old job pretending to be a potential employer asking for a reference. I give her the extension to Joe's desk. As I predicted, he slanders the ever-loving shit out of me, straight up lies, even got my resignation date wrong along with my attendance record, all verifiable, helping my case. I tried the same trick with Boyd, but he was smart enough to point my GF in the direction of a third-party reference dialer the company is supposed to use for these kinds of calls. I proceed to send my old employer, corporate included, a cease and desist letter with a transcript of the call, hinting I may sue for slander. The result? Some time passes, and the other day I'm at the bank with my GF, and I get a call from an old co-worker. I missed the call, but I resign to call him back later. Less than an hour later I get 5 to 6 calls and texts informing me that Mary, Joe, and Boyd were all fired the same day and walked out of the building, and Mary cried. The corporate office was contacted by the EEOC and launched their internal investigation, matching their records with my evidence. The EEOC sent me a return letter with the company's statement, which was fallacious as duck due to their interviews with the Three Stooges, but nonetheless, I suppose they decided it was easier to nip it in the bud and sack their asses to be safe. Karma may be a witch, but in this case, she had nothing to duck and do with it. Now, here is the end of our first story, and I hope you guys are enjoying my content. So before moving to the next story, you guys can share your thought in the comments section about this story, in which OP took revenge on his racist co-worker and manager. Also hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned with us for more satisfying revenge stories. Now, moving to our second story. This story is widely known amongst my family and is constantly brought up and joked about in my group of friends even years later. A buddy of mine suggested that this is the perfect place to make it public, so let's get into this shitstorm. Backstory: I was a senior in high school at the time and I had never been the brightest student. I was a solid C student and I had never received a detention or had any kind of bad student record. This is important because to this day, I still have no idea why the teacher treated me this way. The teacher, who we will name Mrs. Frank, had been a teacher there for more than a decade and was widely known for being a petty, heartless witch, who the administrators saw as the golden child. Mrs. Frank taught algebra, which is my worst subject, so naturally, I had issues understanding the lessons and would ask questions frequently. To some these questions are easily answered, but to me, it was rocket science. Usually, when someone asks a dumb question, no one should address it. However, in Mrs. Frank's case, she would belittle me in front of everyone by saying things such as, "And here comes the slow boy again, wow, surprise, surprise, you don't understand it again, really. We have to go extra slow for you today, don't we, etc." I tried going to the administration about it before, but again she was considered the golden child. They would send someone in to examine her during class. She would act respectful and normal for one day, and go back to being a witch the next. This goes on for about half the year until I had enough. I went to the local Radio Shack, bought a recorder, and secretly recorded every insult she would throw at me. I would sometimes instigate to make up for the lost time. Go ahead, feed the fire. Fast forward to the end of the year and I'm sitting in Mrs. Franks' class when I ask a question. Her response, and I quote, because it's burned into my brain, was, "I've been teaching here for over 10 years and that was the single dumbest question I've ever heard come from anyone's mouth." She continued the lesson without answering. I calmly stood up, packed up my stuff, and headed to the nurse's office to dismiss myself from school. We were allowed to dismiss ourselves if we were 18. I went home, compiled all of the brutal tapes into one glorious masterpiece, and headed back the next day to show the administrators. I sat down with the principal and we listened to a couple of the insults before he stopped me. He wanted more witnesses present as well as Mrs. Franks. He told me we would meet the next day so I could show him and the rest of the administrators the full tape. I walk into school the next morning being the most nervous I've ever been for anything. I was called down to the office where I met with some board directors, the local school police officer, the principal, the vice principal, and Mrs. Franks. What follows was some of the greatest minutes of my life. I watched as the administrators went from fed up with being in another useless meeting to furious and speechless, with some of them keeping their mouths open for the duration of the tape. I also watched Mrs. Frank go from being confident and stuck up to her realizing that she had fucked up beyond repair. She was publicly roasting herself in front of the most important people from the district. The tape ended, and without hesitation, the administrators looked around in astonishment. The principal turns to me and says, "I think we have heard everything we need to, thank you." And I was quietly dismissed from the room. The final time I saw Mrs. Frank was leaving the room. I looked back and we made eye contact through her tear-filled eyes as I gave the biggest evil smile. I returned to class the next week and Mrs. Frank was nowhere to be found. The story spread quickly throughout the school and I was seen as a saint. I had successfully gotten her fired and made it almost impossible for Mrs. Frank to return to her teaching career, as well as cut off most of her connections she had with other teachers in the school. I had ruined her financially because no school district in the area would hire this walking piece of garbage. If you're reading this, Mrs. Frank, I would like to take this moment to tell you to go duck yourself. Now, here comes to the end of our second story, and I hope you enjoyed this revenge video. In my opinion, OP is savage and he didn't only save himself but many other students from that horrible witch. Guys, I want to hear your thought about this story in the comments section. Also, before moving ahead, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel and press the notification bell to remain updated on more fantastic stories. Now, moving on to our final story. So this happened a long time ago, it's probably okay to post here. It was November 2009. And I was jamming to I Got a Feeling by the Black Eyed Peas, looking for a cheap apartment. I find a great ad on Craigslist and arrange for a viewing. I meet the landlady, a portly shrew with a Betty Page haircut. I wasn't here for the company, however, but for the cheap room. It's not great looking, but it is cheap, so I tell her I am interested. She tells me the place is mine and that I can get a deposit by end of the day. Sweet, I rip to the bank and grab the $450 needed, half a month's rent. She and I cross-sign a standard lease and ask when I can get a key to move in, and she says a couple of days as the current tenant has yet to collect all of their stuff. So, I am sleeping on the couch at a buddy's pad for now, and so I just chill, seeing sights, and enjoying the first few weeks in a new city. A couple of days roll by, and I haven't heard from the landlady, so I get frustrated and left a few salty voicemails, but at last I was ghosted. Finally, she leaves me a voicemail and says she was sorry, but she cannot rent the place to me. I start to get angry, but I am a pretty cool customer, so I do the research, find out my rights in an unfamiliar new municipality, and discover that if someone backs out of a lease without a legal reason, the other party is entitled to double the deposit they placed. So I figure she owes me about $900 claims. I leave more messages and emails, again with the ghosting, not answering the phone, and no responses via email either. I get fed up. Now, I had just accepted a new job, but it didn't start until the turn of the month. I would guess it's about the third week of November 2009. I have some spare time, so I hop on the bus, buy a magazine, sit at the bus stop across from the rental house, and just wait and wait. For a couple of hours, I waited, but man was it worth it. I see her showing the unit to another smart mark. I hold my cool and wait for her to finish with her newest renter and make my way over to the house to confront her. As soon as she sees me, she starts to wail about how the tenant changed their mind, blah blah blah, and that's why she couldn't rent to me. I've heard enough. I square my stance directly opposite this upset charlatan. Now you listen to me, you will get me $900 as required by law by the end of the day, or I will go directly to the police station and let them deal with you. She turned white. For a minute I thought she was going to puke on the ground right there in front of me. She says, "Hold on, I will get you your money." I remember thinking, shit, that was easier than I thought. She goes upstairs. The unit was a basement unit in the house she was living in, and I shit you not, hands me a wad of cash and says, "Here, this is ruining my Christmas, but here." She almost pushed me off balance as she jammed the messy wad of cash into me. "Thank you, good day," I say and take the money, count it, and walk away. I didn't turn around and look back, got on the first bus that stopped nearby heading back toward the direction of my friend's house. Not until I was home, I did calm down and realize it was going to be a sweet Christmas, all thanks to a lying phony cheapskate. However, this is not the end of the revenge. About a week later, I get a phone call from a friend asking me if the lady in the news is the same crazy lady I got the double damage deposit from. I'm like, what? Sure enough, it turns out this lady was running the same scam in parallel with a bunch of other victims. I am mortified, not just because I almost got scammed, but because it immediately occurs to me that the money I got was someone else's money, and they are homeless for the holidays. I head right down to the police station, where there is, I shit you not, a line of crying people filing reports about being scammed by this woman. I feel awful, and when it's my turn, I get to the intake officer and start to give my story. I lay it all down, how I fell for it, how I left a snotty voicemail, how I staked out the rental to confront her, my demand of double the money back, my threats of legal action against her, and finally the skillful execution of the law by getting double the deposit back. I tell the cop I took some of the money that belonged to the other victims, and she looks at me and says, "Man, you were the only one smart enough to confront her in a reasonable way. You earned that money. Don't worry about it." A young lady who was now homeless and desperate couldn't help but overhear, and as I am leaving the police station, she approaches me and says, "Hey, did you get your money back from that witch?" To which I sheepishly reply, "Actually, I got double my deposit from her when I threatened her with the police." The girl blinks a couple of times, finally grins, starts a slow clap, and announces to the other victims still waiting to state in the lobby of the police station, "This guy took her for double the damage deposit." And I cringed. But then, in the most unexpected turn of events, the line of victims began applauding, I suppose with the realization that while their money was gone, someone had screwed her back, and that made them happy. They cheered, I felt better, the cops laughed, and we all had a joyful cosmic moment of holiday schadenfreude at her expense. I left the police station with a clean conscience and a smile on my face, and enjoyed every last penny of that worthless witch's nasty stack. Now, here is the end of our today's video, and I hope you enjoyed this revenge completion stories. Guys, I want to hear your thought about this story in the comments section, and let me know if you were in OP's situation, what would you do? And, before you leave, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to remain updated on more fantastic stories.